Good morning, Royal We Fellowship. I'm happy that you're joining me on this 4th of July weekend. Let's go ahead and open up in prayer. Our Father, you are in heaven, and how holy is your name. And we wait for your kingdom to come and your will to be done here on this earth as it is in heaven. Lead us not into paths of temptation and deliver us from the evil schemes that exist in the world. Forgive us of our wrongdoings in this life and help us to forgive those who have wronged us. Give us each and every day what we need to survive. And everybody says, Amen. I know that was kind of a chopped up version of the prayer, but I just felt like that's how I wanted to approach it today. How many of you are aware, first of all, that prayer is powerful? It's good to be able to pray in the way in which we are given instructions to pray. Now, today's topic we're going to be talking about, we're going to jump right into it. We're going to be talking about the toxic seduction that we see in the very beginning. Toxic seduction is something we deal with toxic relationships. We deal with it with narcissistically abusive people. And it really is what takes us off of our path in life, gets us involved with people, places, and things that are damaging and damage our lives. We're going to see exactly how this plays out in Genesis. Now, how many of you know that the motto of the royal we is, in fact, this? It's that narcissistic abuse and toxic relationships often are a result of being with people you have no business being with, doing things you have no business doing, and going places you have no business going. Right? And now this motto, actually, we came up with, or I came up with this part of the Royal We, the original channel, without even seeing it play out in the Bible. I just realized that the pain and suffering I was dealing with toxic narcissists had a lot to do with where I was going and what I was doing with the information that I have in life, and how I was choosing to interact with these very toxic people. How many of you know that there are very toxic people out there who just want to hurt you? Their love is fake. Everything is fake. They're out for their own selfish gain, their own intentions. Can I get an amen? I mean, that's just what we deal with. We're going to see this play out in the very beginning. So open up with me. We're going to go to Genesis chapter 3. We're on chapter 3 now. We've already talked about and uncovered the reality that darkness and light exist. It was part of the very beginning, right? That was the very first Royal We Fellowship. Then we also talked about being made in the image of God, meaning that we are enough. Without our flesh, we are enough. When it comes down to being able to just have that inner peace and joy, that requires nothing of the flesh. We need to stop looking at the outside of ourselves, right? Relationships and this and that, because that's not going to provide that affirmation. The image of God is completeness, it's wholeness, and that's how we were made. But then you add the flesh and the dirt, and then as part of the responsibility of this life, we have the burden of finding suitable helpmates and people in our lives to help us with what we're supposed to do. This is supposed to be separate from how we validate ourselves, right? So we also talked about that, how then God created Adam and Eve, right? Taking a rib from Adam, putting it in Eve, bone of bone, flesh of flesh. This does not mean soulmate. This does not mean spiritual, side partner. It means literally what it says, bone of bone, flesh of flesh. It's a helpmate for earthly things, for the earthly things that need to be done. It's a helpmate that requires responsibility, a responsibility to each other. It is not a soulmate that is supposed to interfere with that image of God that we're supposed to have with God, right? How many of you would say that initially when Adam was created, when man was created, that initial relationship was just supposed to be from God to humanity? That's what that relationship was, right? That's why there was no partner in the beginning because there was no need for a partner. That partner came as a result of the world. So now we're going to talk about something that took place on the earth in Genesis chapter 3. We're going to see the toxic seduction of humanity. Read with me uh, the very first part, chapter 3, verse 1. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. We're going to stop right there and we're going to break this down a little bit for those of you who are reading along Genesis chapter 3. Okay. First of all, let's talk about the serpent. The Hebrew word used for serpent is nakash. Nakash is serpent. It's derived from the Hebrew word lakash, which is the root. Okay. And I'm not exactly sure how the roots work in the Hebrew language. However, what that means is that's the main word. So the main word is lakash. The nakash, serpent, is derived from lakash. Now, what's interesting is lakash, which is the root word, it actually means charmer. It means whisperer. It means it's whispering. The implication that's given to us in the beginning of Genesis chapter 3 is that the woman came across a charmer, a whisperer, that in which was casting a spell. Okay? And we're going to break down how this spell was cast. So, first, let's reread it based on the primitive root of the Hebrew language. If we reread it, it says, the charmer or seducer, right, was the most subtle, ancient, right? It was the most subtle of all the beasts that were there, right? And when we look at subtle, it's also important that we break down subtle. The ancient Hebrew word is adrum, which means wise, crafty, and shrewd. Okay, so we have the charming one, the seducer that was on the earth at the time, was more wise and more crafty than anything else that God had created on the earth. This is important to understand. All right. Now, how many of you would say that you have come across in your toxic relationships a certain charm, a certain amount of wisdom behind this charm? There's a seductiveness to it. It's crafty. It's very shrewd. It's able to get in and get a hold of you and get out when it needs to get out. This is that charm. This is that seducer. I'm going to be talking more about charm and seduction on the regular Royal We channel because there is an evilness to charm, seduction. It's can be related to magic, spell casting, and a lot of it does have people fall into a certain spell. And I'm sure many of you can attest and many of you can agree that in your toxic relationships with narcissists, and I'm talking specifically about romantic partnerships, you can look back and feel as though you were under some kind of a spell. Nothing else makes sense in the relationship. When you met the person, they weren't all that attractive to you. They don't have all that money, or they don't have the things that you would have thought you would have wanted. Yet they charmed you in such a way it made you feel like you were under some kind of a spell. Okay, we're going to see two of the tactics that the charmer, all right, used. Now, first of all, who was the charmer? Who was this seducer? The seducer that was wise, that was crafty, and that was shrewd. Who is this? Now, a lot of people teach this, and we're grown up in Western Christianity believing that it's a literal snake, and we get this image of a snake twirling down an apple tree, right? And the apple is the forbidden fruit, and the snake is the literal serpent. However, now that we know that the Hebrew word, it comes from a root word meaning charm, charmer, seduction, whisperer, we can kind of disregard the physical presence of a snake, okay? We can see that serpent, snake is also used as a descriptive term to talk about anybody or anything that is slippery, snake-like. How many of you would refer to people you know as snakes? Okay, they're not physically a snake, but that's just what they live their lives by. We didn't just pull that out of nowhere. We get the first look at that here in the opening text of the Bible. This snake is a character. This character is the deceptive, seducing charmer. What we can also see is that this, who is there, must have already been there in the beginning, because it was not a part of what we see God create. We saw God create humanity, the soul, the mind, the heart. We saw him create flesh. We saw in the earlier text of Genesis that God created all the beasts of the field and all the animals. And it also indicates that God created two of every kind. But this that we see, the seducer, the charmer, this crafty, shrewd entity, there's only one of its kind. We don't see anywhere written that God created two of this kind, being this shrewd, being this charmer. So there's only one. So it's safe to say that what we're getting a glimpse of here and what we're seeing is, in fact, the enemy, the adversary of God, the adversary of God's creation, the adversary of God's people, who was already on the earth, who was already a part of the earth, right? We can look and see that there's many writings on this. Ambrose of Milan writes this. This is talking about the serpent, the charmer, the whisperer. This is our adversary, whose wisdom is of this world. So what we have to, and that's a direct quote from Ambrose of Milan. So why was there wisdom of this world already? Because the charmer had already been a part of this world. Okay. For how long? Well, we don't know. We don't know. Again, this goes back to the very first, and I encourage you to go back and watch the very first Royal We Fellowship, because as we're getting an image, rather, of the earth being created, what we're seeing is that the earth was there. It was dark, it was chaotic, and it was void. Just like it says in the beginning, the Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the deep, right? And the earth was formless and void, but something was there. It was there. It straight up tells us that. So something happened between God created heaven and the earth was dark and void and chaotic. And then God said, let there be light. He divided the light from the darkness. This is the image of God's new creation, separated from what was already there. What was already there? Possibly the adversary, that which is dark, that which has no value to God, that which is chaotic and disagreeable to the Creator, to God. That's the enemy. So what the Spirit of God was hovering over could very well have been the darkness of the enemy, the chaos of the adversary. Was already there, right? We don't know this. This is just speculation. However, we know that in the newer testaments of the Bible, Jesus did say, I saw, and the actual word for I saw meant in the Greek language, what he said is, I was there when Satan, Lucifer, the devil, the enemy, the adversary, was thrown out of the presence of God onto the earth. Boom! Like lightning, which is pretty catastrophic if you think about a bolt of lightning, boom, flung down to the earth. That's what Jesus says. I was there. I witnessed the enemy, the adversary, flung out of the presence of God like a bolt of lightning, hitting the ground. We don't actually see that displayed in the Bible, so we have to understand in the context, Jesus is talking about something he was a part of and witnessed a long time ago. We also don't see it anywhere in Jesus or in Genesis, and so we have to understand that this happened in a time and a place where we don't know. Could it be in that gap period? Possibly. Could it be the reason the earth was chaotic and dark in the beginning? Possibly. So what we see now is the adversary that is here in the garden. Now we're going to get into the seduction. The seduction. Now we see the very first seduction of the woman. Okay? Now, the seduction that we see the woman is the same process of seduction that's being made daily by pickup artists, by charmers, by narcissistic, abusive people, by toxic individuals, wannabe charmers, people who work to cast spells over you in your life, over me in my life, right? How many of you, again, this goes back to the question I've asked earlier, how many of you felt like you had some spell cast over you? That's the only explanation for why you were involved in this toxic situation, is because there was you lost your senses. You gave in to some spell that was being cast over you, right? This is the spell that's cast by seduction. And as I said, I'm going to be talking more about seduction, toxic seduction, on the Royal We channel. So be ready for those videos. We're going to see the first seduction of the woman by a pickup artist, a charmer, the original seducer, the father of seductions, the enemy, the adversary, who worked to cast a spell over the woman. Notice that he went after the woman, not the man. And it has nothing to do with the sexual differences or anything like that. There is a reason, and we're going to get to why the charming, deceptive one chose the woman. Read with me, continuing chapter 3 in Genesis, okay? Verse 1, the same verse, he says, he spoke, this is the adversary, the charmer, the seducer, spoke to the woman and said, basically, hi, right? Yes. Has God said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? Okay. Let's understand something first and foremost, that the reason this seduction and this even took place is that I believe that the woman had to be in a place where she was primed. One of the a part of the motto of the Royal We is narcissistic abuse, toxic relationships are a result of being with people you have no business being with, right? Being in places you have no business being, and doing things you have no business doing. How would the adversary be able to approach Eve in this situation, talking about a certain subject in this situation, if Eve was not already contemplating or pondering such a thing? This is the going to places you have no business going in a toxic relationship. So Eve had separated herself from her partner, or the partner separated himself. Adam separated himself from Eve. Either way, they were not together. So already they had gone somewhere off their path of togetherness, and she was contemplating and pondering in another aspect of life. This now opened the door for the deceptive charmer to now come in as she was pondering and say, hey, and this is why the adversary chose the woman. Hey, did God really say that you can't eat of every tree of this garden? Basically, out of the shrewdness and craftiness, how many of you know pickup artists? They watch carefully and they learn about you. This craftiness, this shrewd serpent, this charmer was watching Eve, watching her ponder over this forbidden fruit. And how many of you also realize by now that the fruit does not represent an apple or literal fruit? It's something that is off the beaten path of what Adam and Eve were supposed to be doing. Okay? This is what the fruit represents. It's actually rebellion. It's a rebellious way. It's going against what they should be doing. He caught her pondering this, caught her in a place where she shouldn't have been, then approached her. And now notice this, the first act of a charmer, of a deceiver, is a rhetorical question. The question, what is the rhetorical question? Right? Has God said you shall not eat of every tree in the garden? That's a rhetorical question. How many of you know this? What's a rhetorical question? A rhetorical question is a question that you're not supposed to answer. It's a question that already has the answer given in it, or the answer is going to be given. Okay? He's not, the crafty one, the deceiver, the charmer's not asking her for an answer. Did God really tell you? Because the charmer knows that God spoke nothing to Eve literally. Who did God give the instructions to? Adam. And then through Adam, the information was passed to the partner Eve. And so taking advantage of this, the charmer, the seducer approached Eve and said, did God really tell you that you cannot? have the fruit of all that's in front of you? Okay. Now, how many of you have dealt with these rhetorical questions from toxic people and toxic situations and narcissists in your life? Questions where there's no answers to it. This is part of being deceived and falling into the charm, because what the question is meant to do is make you think, right? The rhetorical question by the crafty seducer, I'm going to read my notes here. It's easier to get it across this way. Was not asking for, it was not asking a question for her to answer. Rather, it was making a point for her to ponder that God didn't say anything to her at all. Okay, the seducer is cunning enough to know the woman heard nothing from God about what to eat and what not to eat of the fruit. As we said, God told Adam this, and through Adam, Eve was informed. So the rhetorical question, not meant for an answer, rather meant to make a point, cause another person to question or think. This is the case, right? Eve didn't really know what God said. And this could possibly be why Eve was caught in that situation to begin with. Why was she there pondering over this forbidden fruit? Because she didn't have all the answers. She didn't have understanding. It wasn't clear to her. And sometimes in our lives, it's not clear when we're just told something. Listen, please don't do this, right? It's going to hurt you. How many of you would say, well, I want to know more about that, right? I know I've been this way throughout my life. Well, why is things like that? Why do we have to do things this way? We can see children. How many of you have had children say, Mom, Dad, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do that? It doesn't make sense. So Eve was especially confused because she had secondhand information from Adam, was pondering this fruit that existed, probably not having anything, not really understanding. However, prior to the charming one entering into the situation, she had no need for understanding. She had a path laid out, full of responsibility and full of life. Had she understood that, but the charming one swept in and now opened her eyes. Now then, let's follow along. As far as opening the eyes go, the first thing we see is the rhetorical question, which plays into her lack of complete understanding. Okay. I'm going to tell you this as we read on. He continued, and this is the serpent, the crafty one. He said to the woman, or the response that Eve gave was, we may not eat of the fruit we may eat of all the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God said, you shall not eat it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. The response from the charming one was, the charming seducer was, surely you shall not die. Challenging in a rebelliousness that was spoken by God. He continues, the serpent continues, for God does know that in the day thereof that your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. The reality, it's interesting, the reality is during this process of seduction, the eyes were already being opened. The very fact that they were having this dialogue, that the woman was entertaining this rhetorical questioning by the charming one, is an indication that her eyes were already opened to the choice of right and wrong. She was being influenced, okay? A lot of the times we don't understand this, right? We feel like when we look back in hindsight and we say, wow, the narcissistic abuse that I experienced, that's when my eyes are truly open, were after the fact. However, your eyes were opening during the whole courtship process. Your eyes were being open to some alternative reality, to the reality that you were called to live, the purpose that you had in life. I'm talking about those who are friends, romantic partners. You were on one path in life, and this charming seducer came into your world and started to get you off of that path, opening your eyes to something different. Now, you didn't fully realize what it meant. You realized going into it that it was different, and there were things that were wrong about it. There were things that were going against what you knew to be true. However, in toxic relationships, we can tend to just ignore that stuff. We call them red flags in the narcissistic abuse community. Now, typically we have red flags, right? Eve had her red flags. The red flags were, listen, we're told not to go near and talk about and touch that fruit in the midst of the garden. Red flags, that's the red flags. And the charming one is still pushing and pressing in with the rhetoric. Not asking her questions about what she knows, but informing her of what the serpent knows, what the one of this world knows about this world. And what the one is explaining and trying to get across is, you're not going to die. I'm here. I know about this forbidden fruit. I know all about this forbidden fruit, and I'm still here, and I'm as charming as ever. And I'm okay. Follow me. How many of you have dealt with that, right? The toxic, narcissistically abusive person says, hey, I know all about this lifestyle. Follow me. Let me introduce you to it. That's the charm. That's the seduction. The seducer goes on to say, for God knows that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods. So the charming seducer paints and illustrates this image that partaking in this new life, this earthly life that's being proposed, will somehow benefit and reward, will somehow do something for the person that they had not yet experienced. And prior to that, what the person knew was that they had a path that was fulfilled, everything was provided, right? Many of us in our lives were on a particular path that was laid out before us. We were seduced by the seducing charm of toxic individuals in our life. We did not know what we did not know going into the situation, and that was what piqued our curiosity, and that is what makes the deceptive charm of the seducers so potent in our lives, because we do not know what we do not know. And so we give up what we do know in order to pursue what we do not know in these situations. Now, how many of you would say, I've heard this time and time again, I would love to go back to, when can I go back to who I used to be? When can I go back to the path that I was once on? When can I go back to the life that I remember? That's that desire to go back to that place you were before the deceptive charm entered into your life, bringing you into darkness, right? And that's where we're at as well. Okay. Now, what's interesting in this is then also the man, Adam, he partook in it as well. He saw that nothing happened to his wife, saw that she did not just drop dead from eating this fruit. He also became seduced by whatever it was that was offered. He became seduced by not only the serpent, but the seducer, but also his partner. He did not foresee what was to come, nor did he remember the instructions that were given to him by the Creator. And he chose to leave his path, his purpose in life, to pursue this as well. Now, I'm going to wrap this message up by just asking, how many of you have experienced this exact story in your own life? You were seduced and charmed off of your path. You knew your purpose. You had ideas. You had visions. You had things that you wanted to accomplish in life. God-given dreams, God-given aspirations. You gave up this person and fell into chaos, which is what Adam and Eve fell into. And we're going to get into that in the lessons that are to come over the next weeks of falling into chaos. The good news in this, don't be too scared, because we're going to talk about what it means to come back out of the chaos and what we have to do. As a matter of fact, I believe the rest of the Bible, and this is the reason I'm doing Royal We Fellowship, is I strongly believe the rest of the Bible is a rebuilding story. What are we rebuilding? We're not rebuilding physical things in life. That's not what the Bible is about. It's not about, rebuilding your house that you lost or rebuilding this. It's rebuilding yourself, rebuilding your purpose, rebuilding who you are, layer by layer, rebuilding yourself that existed before the temptation into chaos, right? And if we can rebuild ourselves and get back to the place of knowing our purpose, our path, growing from the chaos that we've experienced, I believe that throughout the Bible, we'll see that God takes care of the rest. I believe God's desire is to put us back into that garden. That's the desire. That's where we're headed. God will take care of that part if we take care of the part of getting ourselves from the place of chaos where we were seduced into, to building ourselves back up to knowing in full knowledge of our purpose and who we are, the things that we need to do in life, the things we need to obey in life, the rules, the morals, the guide that has been set before us, so we do not fall into seduction, because there will always be a seducer trying to cast a spell over you. If there's anything that we've learned by this story, it's that seduction, that seducer was here long before you and me, has a lot more experience in this world. That seducer works through people, places, and things, because it's a governor, if you will, over all things on this earth. The seduction, by the way, does not have to be another person. You can be seduced by money. You can be seduced by ambition. You can be seduced by power. You can be seduced by a whole bunch of things. And it gets very, burden heavy trying to sort all this out in our lives. But the rebuilding process of the Bible is to get us to become immune towards this type of toxic seduction, so that we can find ourselves again, right? Before the seduction. And then God will take care of the rest. God will put us back where we need to be. Once we rebuild and get out from under the spell of toxicity. With that, I'm going to wrap this up. I want to thank you so much for being here, part of Royal We Fellowship. And have a great day and have a great rest of the week. And be sure to join in next Saturday morning for Royal We Fellowship. We're going to continue on. And if you have not guessed already, we're going through from the beginning, hopefully, God willing, all the way to the end. And we are going to look at the Bible as an instruction for dealing with the toxic, very narcissistic, very evil world. This is not a time to be messing around. This is not something where we want to grab everybody's hands and try to pull it in, and because that's not what the Bible is all about, right? There is love your enemies, but understand that we have very real enemies. That's the important thing to understand. We see the enemy, the adversary, in the form of charm and seduction, toxic charm and seduction, right from the get-go. Right in the beginning, we're informed of this entity. Have a blessed day, and we will continue to work and towards finding our purpose and blocking the toxicity and blocking the charmers, blocking the seduction, all right, in its place. Have a blessed day, everybody, and we'll be back next Saturday on Royal We Fellowship. All right, bless you all. Have a great day.